Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on our next webinar in our ongoing aerospace series, this one on measuring process effectiveness through KPIs. My name is Ryan Daly, Marketing Manager here at NSF. When you join the webinar today, you are all placed on mute. So if you have any questions throughout, please use the chat function, and we'll leave time at the end to answer those. This webinar is being recorded and will be distributed later this week. It will also be available online, along with all of our other recorded webinars and other aerospace transition resources. Our speakers today are going to be Mike McRandall, the NSF ISR Aerospace Business Unit Manager, and Don McFarland, our Technical Scheme Manager for Aerospace. Don and Mike, I'll hand it off to you.
Well, very good. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, everybody, for joining us on this next series of the aerospace webinars, as Ryan said. Our topic today is on measuring process effectiveness through KPIs. And before we delve into that, I want to go through kind of the outline for the course. We're going to talk about our transition plan benchmarks, give you an update on those as we always have. We'll go through the 9100, 9110, 9120, and the 9101 series requirements or citations associated with KPIs, and then get into why we should measure and what we should measure, and then show you a couple optional tools associated with KPI tracking. And then obviously we'll get into the Q&A period. So first things first, transition plan benchmarks, an update on those benchmarks. As discussed previously, all of our 2016 benchmarks are now closed. We've moved into the 2017 cycle, and I'm pleased to report an update on here of 9120. So AS9120B is now listed as one of NSF's credentials, and we're still waiting on the 9110. Again, that was delayed based on some late training material that was released into the industry, but we're anticipating authentication of that before the next webinar series. Some key dates to keep in mind, June 15, 2017, and as we've discussed in the past, all dates started after, all audits started after this date must be conducted to the new standard. There are some exceptions for special audits, but everything conducted, all surveillance and recertification and initial audits conducted after that date need to be done to the new versions of the standard. So we'll need to make sure that we conduct the audit prior to that, otherwise anticipate an upgrade through the 2017 audit cycle. Some other benchmarks mostly associated with stuff that NSF has to deliver to our accreditation partners. Those are associated with risk management planning so that the industry can stay abreast as to what's going on within each of the CBs. These are mandatory reporting cycles that CBs have to run up the food chain, so to speak, to ensure that all of our accreditation partners and oversight partners are in the loop. The next 2018 benchmark here is one that NSF has arbitrarily set. We're looking to have everybody transitioned and upgraded through the by June of 2018 because of this key date here, which is September 15th, 2018, and that's the date that all audits have to be done, closed, and certs issued to the new standards. Otherwise, your current certificate rides off into the sunset, which means you would end up starting over as an initial audit with a longer duration, and it gets a little more painful and a lot more expensive to go that route. So we really want to drive everybody to have their audits conducted before June 18th. That'll afford you the 60 days that you normally get for corrective actions and leave some time for us to conduct our cert decision, tech review, activities in the CB and get you a certificate uploaded into the system, as well as one for you to have on file prior to that expiration date. So some key dates to keep in mind. As mentioned, the next section here is to talk about where the KPI terminology and how this all fits into the ISO and AS nomenclature. So with that, we'll just go through some of the citations from both the AS series or the AS9100 document. You'll find that this verbiage is very similar to what's in the 9110 and 9120, but I'm just going to focus on 9100 for now. given a bulk of the certifications out there are in that 9100 space. Then I'll go through some 9101 requirements or citations and kind of explain the reasons why it's important for an organization. So with that, we'll jump right into it. The first citation comes from Clause 5.1.1 of the AS9100D standard. And as you can see, there's a lot of information in here, but in particular, the one that we're focused on is ensuring that the quality policy and quality objectives are established for the quality management system and are compatible with the context and strategic direction of the organization. So top management needs to develop quality policy and quality objectives. Now we'll talk more about what quality objectives are, but in Don's mind, these are the measurable scorecards, the objectives associated with top-level performance. So quality objectives is the ISO and AS vernacular associated with KPIs or scorecards. But it's telling us early on in the document, top management's got to come up with some quality objectives, and that those need to be aligned with our quality policy, because the quality policy is the top-level vision of where we want to go, what we want to be, and the quality objectives are the statements or the measurable objectives, the measurable targets associated with how we achieve that quality policy or that vision. So with that, we'll move on to the next citation here, which comes from Clause 6.2.1. And this is speaking specifically to the quality objectives under the section 6.2, but 6.2.1 says the organization shall establish quality objectives at relevant functions, levels, and processes needed by the QMS. So keywords there, key phrases, says at relevant functions and levels. So we have to ensure that they're established relative to your company and your company's needs for teams, for processes, for customers, whatever makes sense for your group. And we'll talk more about that later on as far as what is relevant and how do you determine that. But the standard doesn't prescribe that they have to be done at every process as far as this goes. But it also goes on to tell us that the quality objectives need to be consistent with the quality policy. They need to be measurable. They need to take into account the applicable requirements, be relevant to the conformity of product and services and enhancement of customer satisfaction, be monitored, be communicated, be updated as appropriate. It says the organization shall maintain documented information on the quality objectives. So this is telling us that we need to have quality objectives established. We need to have those communicated to the masses within the organization, and they need to be measurable so that people can understand their current performance associated with those objectives. We'll talk more about that. I'll leave it at that for now, but we'll get into that a little bit more. 6.2.2 says that when planning how to achieve its quality objectives, the organization shall determine what will be done, what resources are required, who will be responsible, when it will be completed, and how the results will be evaluated. So if you're a PDCA fanatic, you'll understand that this is right in line with what Deming had in mind. We plan what our processes should do and what the expected outcomes are. We execute those, and then we check to make sure that it was done. Then we take appropriate action when we find some results that can be improved upon. So the standard is directly in line with that approach. And where this fits in is the quality objectives, the KPIs, whatever terminology we want to use, is the means by which we determine, did the process work? Was it good? You're going to find a quote later on. I won't steal the thunder there, but we can do a lot of good things within our process, but sometimes we're not doing the correct things, and our process follows all of the steps, but it doesn't ensure satisfaction of our customers, stakeholders, internal stakeholders, etc. So finding the right metrics and ensuring that we're meeting those metrics is important, and this clause directly falls in line with that. The next clause is 7.3. This talks about awareness. So this is kind of a newer requirement, and I won't say it's new because the standard had all of this lumped into the competence piece before. This is just specifying some specific information that employees of the organization need to know. So it says that organizations shall ensure that persons doing work under the organization's control are aware of the quality policy, the relevant quality objectives, their contribution to the effectiveness of the QMS, including the benefits of improved performance, and the implications of not conforming with the requirements. There's some more things here that are talked about, but I really want to focus on these. So it says we have to, at all levels of the organization, we need to have an awareness of the quality policy, the objectives, how they contribute to the objectives and to the policy, and what happens if they're not doing the right things. Or if there's a non-conforming condition that's generated, what could that lead to? So specific knowledge that has to be shared with the employees. Now, this was not necessarily a new requirement under this standard, because it was definitely implied under the old standard, said that we had to have an awareness of the quality policy and awareness of the quality objectives, and they had to understand how they contributed to the success of it. So it's just more specifically laid out under the new standard as to what knowledge and awareness that employees must have for the quality system requirements. So with that, the next clause that I found is under section 9.1.2. And granted, we skipped over some of the product realization clauses that talk about process and product-specific objectives. Those are usually the result of product realization planning. We create objectives associated with the product. You can definitely have process and product-specific objectives as well, but I'm focusing more on kind of the quality objective level, the top level metrics, and then how those flow down into more organization or department process-specific metrics. So that customer satisfaction clause, clause 9.1.2, says the organization shall monitor customers' perception of the degree to which their needs and expectations have been fulfilled. The organization shall determine the methods for obtaining, monitoring, and reviewing this information. So not much change within the ISO clause, but if we look down here, it still has the AS requirement that we have to monitor some specific requirements or some specific objectives at a minimum. So it says shall include but not limited to product and service conformity, on-time delivery, customer complaints, and corrective action requests. So again, no change to the requirement there, but it identifies some specific things that we need to be monitoring as a part of our system to ensure that we're tracking what's important to our customers. It doesn't specify how we monitor product and service conformity as an example. That can be in terms of RMAs. That can be in terms of first pass yield internally. It can be a cumulative of both. There's a lot of ways to address that, but it says as a minimum we need to have those 4 items monitored. Again, product service conformity, on-time delivery performance, customer complaints, and corrective action requests. We'll talk more about how we can potentially monitor those in just a few moments. Next clause is 9.1.3, and this is under analysis of data. So we've collected all of this information regarding the effectiveness of our quality system and its processes, and guess what? The expectation is that we do something with it. So if we look under here, it says the results of the analysis, the organization shall analyze and evaluate appropriate data and information arising for monitoring and measuring. The results of the analysis can be used to evaluate the planning and effectiveness of the QMS, the degree of the customer satisfaction, and then the actions to be taken to drive the improvement of the QMS. So essentially, we're using all of this data that we've collected from internal, external sources, process KPIs, etc., to help hopefully drive educated decisions or educated guesses within the organization's management structures to ensure that we're steering the company in the right direction, rather than making arbitrary decisions on where we should go or emotional decisions. We use that data to help drive us in the correct direction. One of the tools that's been employed for that is the management review. So it tells us at planned intervals we need to ensure that we're reviewing the extent to which quality objectives have been met, and process performance and conformity of product and services. So it specifically outlines some of those key things that need to be reviewed as part of the management review activity to ensure that management is using that information to help drive the change associated with needed people, resources, infrastructure, work environment, etc. So it's giving us specific direction on what we need to consider as a management team. No change to that requirement, as you probably can tell. That's just kind of clarifying the expectation of what we do with all this data. Now, you'll notice that within the AS9100 document itself, it has not used the terminology KPI. So where does that terminology come from? Within AS9101F, which is a a standard associated with how we, the CD, perform the audit of you, the client organization, against AS9100, it introduces the term KPI, or Key Performance Indicator, under the definitions clause 3.2. And it says measures associated with goals or targets showing how well an organization is achieving its objectives or critical success factors for a particular project. KPIs are used to objectively define a quantifiable and measurable indication of the organization's progress towards achieving its goals. Under the note, KPIs relating to an organization's financial performance are not in the scope of the 9101 standard. However, economic measures like sales quotas, scrap value reduction, etc., can certainly be considered acceptable measures for process improvement. So essentially what this is saying is we as auditors of your organization do care about these KPIs, or the quality objectives, because these are the health indicators for your organization's processes to determine not only are you doing the right things, but are you doing things correctly. And more importantly, I said that inversely. It should be not only are you doing correctly, are you doing the right things? And these KPIs are going to help to tell us whether or not you're doing the correct things. So key clarification there, again, says organizational performance is not in scope. So we're not necessarily looking at your EBITDA. We're not looking at revenue. We may see that information, but I assure you that's not something we're going to be reporting into our report structure. Now, one clarification here is we do care about the percentage of business that different customers make up. And again, we ask for that through our pre-planning activity. One of the forms that we send out asks for who are the top 5 aviation, space, and defense customers and their approximate percentage of revenue for your business. We don't want dollar figures. We want to know how big are they within your company. And the reason for that, one, it's an industry requirement. Two, we're looking to see for the companies that are making you the most money and hopefully having the most orders come through, we're going to bias our sampling to look at those customers. We want to focus on the customers that are important to your organization and ensure that we're pulling enough samples to adequately represent those customers. So if they're the biggest in your facility, we should certainly be pulling samples associated with those customers. But with that clarified, again, we're not looking at the financial performance. We're not looking at profitability. We're looking at some other relevant KPIs, relevant objectives associated with the QMS performance. Does that mean you have to redact the financial performance off of the report? No, we see that type of information all the time. Again, we have a confidentiality agreement with you as auditors, so it's not something that we're going to go blabbering and disclose to people that shouldn't know, but it's certainly not something we're going to report into the forms that we have to submit because it's not pertinent to the QMS. So that said, we'll move into clause 4.2.1. Again, this comes from AS9101F. It says the audit planning shall take into account as appropriate to the relevant audit phase the sequence and organization of the processes, the criticality of products and services, the risks associated with the QMS, related products and safety issues, results of internal audits, previous audit findings, performance measures, and trends for quality and on-time delivery. And then you can see previous management review results and customer requirements. So again, this is part of that pre-planning activity. We're looking to see who are the big customers and how are you performing for those customers. So if you're filling out the information on that pre-planning form that the auditor sends to you, you're disclosing this information, then we use that to help tailor the audit plan to where we see the potential risks. This helps us to ensure that we have a sufficient time identified and allocated to all of these different topics should there be something there that is a potential gotcha, because nothing's worse than getting on site and having to change that audit plan pretty drastically when we uncover a smoking gun. We'd rather hopefully identify those smoking guns up front, create the audit plan associated with it, allocating enough time with the right people, and then just working through the audit, hopefully finding everything as well and that you're on the right track. But that's the reason for that pre-planning. And again, we're using your quality and on-time delivery trends to help drive us towards the sampling plan that we're going to take. So it's important to help supply that. Typically, we see a copy of the previous management review. It's not uncommon to get that from the client, and that includes that information because that's, one of the required inputs to management review. So if you're supplying that management review, which includes this, that's where we're getting that source data from, which is great. One last section here from 9101F, and this is clause 4.2.2.5.1. Don't worry, there's not a test later on. It's talking about process results. So the audit team shall record measures, targets, and values of the KPIs related to each audited operational process. And then it points specifically to Clause 8. So under 9101D or 9110C, 9120B, Clause 8 is the product realization stuff. Under the previous or current versions, it's Clause 7. Okay, so anything that has a Clause 7 previous or current version or a Clause 8 tie under the new standard will have this PEAR form, which is the Process Effectiveness Assessment Report. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. And we have to record on that PEAR form the appropriate measures, targets, and values associated with KPIs governing that process. So we're taking into account the confidentiality of the information. Again, we're not reporting any of the financial indicators. We're using your information there, determining your process effectiveness, your scorecards associated with that process to determine whether or not you're doing the right things, not whether you're doing them correctly. That's where the NCRs are going to come in should you have anything that deviates from your process. But these process results, this section is more discussing, are you doing the right things? At the end of the day, you did everything correctly, but if you didn't do the right things, your indicators would hopefully show that your customers are dissatisfied or you're getting a number of returns, et cetera. So we're using both data points. And it's required or mandatory for us to use those KPIs as determined by you on the forms that we report to industry. It says the audit team shall issue an NCR against the relevant 9100 series standard clause when the process is not delivering planned results. So if you're not taking appropriate action to drive the improvement, there's a clause that says you have to do that. We would write a nonconformity against it. If you haven't defined your process measurements, there's a clause that says you have to have monitoring and measuring activities for your processes. We're going to write a nonconformity against that. For companies that have a process, they have KPIs or monitoring and measurement associated with those processes, and they're taking appropriate action to ensure that goals and targets are met, there's no nonconformity, and it's showing that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So that's great. The PEAR form, I know I said we were going to talk about this. This is a brief overview of what that PEAR form looks like. And you've probably seen these from your auditors. This is specific to the new version, so you can tell because it's got number 5 here. The current version is a score of 1 to 4. Under the new version, the format changed just slightly, and then it added a separate level 5 onto this process effectiveness matrix. And I'll talk more to that in another slide. The next slide has a little bit larger section there, or a little bit larger view of that. But what I wanted to point out to everybody is if you look here, it shows the KPIs specific to this process. So whatever process name is written here, this is where we would report the KPIs associated with that, along with the target and the current performance. And then over here, we would write anything that's been done when a KPI doesn't meet the target or your user-defined target. So say your on-time delivery target is 95%, you're performing at 72%. Over here, we would detail what specific actions or what corrective actions you've taken associated with getting you on track to meet that requirement. Now, it's pretty tough for us to justify that your actions are effective if year over year we find KPIs are not being met, meaning your on-time delivery performance is substandard for 4 years, 3 years, whatever, because the standard does say that we have to take appropriate action. And if you're continually hovering in the same space, kind of fits into that definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. You got to take action to get you back into a conforming state or get you to a point where you're meeting those targets. So we would expect to see some driven improvement associated with the actions that have been implemented. And we'll detail that on the CAR form because we have to justify the PEAR scoring. And as far as why that action matters, it drives you into a different boat or into a different column here associated with the PEM or the Process Effectiveness Matrix. So this is, again, from the PEAR form. You can see it listed on the right or shown on the right-hand side of the PEAR form. The auditor's going to fill this out as they go through. And just a closer view of it shows that on the left axis, we have process realization. So this is planned activities fully realized, not fully realized, or not realized. So essentially this is no corrective actions, some corrective action required, and significant corrective action. So if I issue a corrective action as a result of an audit nonconformity, you're going to be in one of these two rows, meaning your process isn't fully realized, it's not fully implemented, or not fully effective, okay? Now on the other axis down here, it's process results. And this is where KPIs come into play. Your planned results are achieved, meaning your KPIs are determined, and you're meeting your target or exceeding your target. Over here in the middle column, planned results not achieved, but appropriate action is being taken associated with that. So again, your on-time delivery performance is performing substandard, but you're taking action to get you there. You know, you have an assignable cause or a root cause, and you're driving the needed improvement to get back on track. Over here in this column, we see planned results not achieved and appropriate actions not being taken, or we can't find evidence of appropriate action being taken. It would drop into this column. There used to be, under the current versions, under 9100C, there's some mandatory nonconformities that have to be issued associated with this. But I will say, even though the mandatory requirement for nonconformity is quote-unquote gone for these certain PEAR scorings, I'll tell you, if we have something that falls under this, there's definitely evidence to show that you warrant a nonconformity. Because again, the standard says we have to take appropriate action, and by definition, if you're in this column, you're not taking appropriate action. So there should be a nonconformity associated with some facet of that. But if you're taking appropriate action, you're going to be more towards the right-hand side of the spreadsheet or of the table here, and it won't be an issue. Okay? So with that, that's a little bit of background on what the standard requires. So let's talk about why we measure or what we should measure. Some provoking quotes from Peter Drucker, who is a pretty renowned business consultant. These ones stick out in my head as being relevant to this topic. So the first one says, "There is nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all." So we could be doing things very, very well, but if we're not doing the right things, it's pretty much pointless. And this is where using both facets of did we follow the process and are we doing the right things through our process matters. And if we go back to that PEM, you'll see that's exactly the layout here. Are we doing things according to our process on the left-hand side? And over here, are we doing them, or are we doing the right things? Okay, so directly in line with his philosophy there, which again I think is pretty sound. The next quote, "What gets measured gets improved." I think we can all agree that if we add attention to it, we add some scorecards associated with it, things tend to get better. The key is measuring the right things, measuring the right health indicators of the process or of the product or of the system to ensure that we're driving the improvement. We may not select the perfect metrics, but we can refine those over time. There's nothing that says our KPIs have to be static. In fact, the thought is we measure things, and as those things improve, we continually improve and select some other more relevant metrics. Perfectly acceptable philosophy. The last quote that I want to hit here is, doing the right thing is more important than doing the thing right. So we got to make sure we're doing the right thing. And again, that's where the KPIs are going to help to tell us that we're achieving customer satisfaction, whether it be an internal indicator or an external customer indicator. Are we doing things that matter? Are we meeting the requirements of our stakeholders? Because we can be definitely fulfilling all of the requirements of our procedure, but still build garbage. And we certainly don't want to be doing that. So with that, I want to kind of take a turn here and look at it from a different perspective. When you go to the hospital, we see these different charts that nurses or doctors are using to monitor a patient's health. And if we look, there's not much information on here, but these are all relevant indicators as to how well this person or this patient is performing. So on here you have the heart rate, and you have a tracing of what that heart is doing within the body. So right here I can tell that the patient has got a little bit of a fast heart rate, and their heart is doing some funky things that needs to be treated. Okay, down here it's giving me blood pressure, and this is telling me how well their blood is circulating through the body and whether or not their vital organs are being perfused. Down here is the oxygen saturation. So this is how much oxygen is getting into the blood that's circulating with adequate pressure at a correct rate, and it's giving oxygen to those vital organs. So with just these few indicators, we can tell the basics of whether or not the patient is healthy or sick. Now, granted, there are some other things that need to be drilled into once you identify something abnormal, like the elevated heart rate or the elevated pulse this person has. We would maybe dig into the more specific indices associated with why that is, whether it be a blood analysis or something like that. There's going to be something else done to troubleshoot that, right? But we monitor those vital few things that are going to tell us the health of the patient or of the process. So selecting those vital few are going to be important. The other key concept here is time matters. We can't have something so busy that it can't be digested easily. And I threw the picture of the dash cluster or the instrument cluster from a car on here because really this is our dashboard, literally, for our car. And this is giving us all sorts of indicators at a quick glance as to how our car is performing and how we are performing as drivers as we're heading down the road. We have some visual cues associated with problems, whether they be my battery is low, my oil pressure is low, I've got a door open, I need to service my engine, whatever it is, it's telling me, or even this one over here, where my fuel level is, right? So at a quick glance, we can get an idea of how our vehicle is performing. And the key concept there is we need to make sure that these KPIs are easily digested. We're not investing a ton of time into interpretation of the data because let's face it, especially in companies where our on-time delivery is poor, we can't allocate time away from the machine or away from building widgets to interpret whether or not we're doing well. So we need something quick and easy that's going to provide alerts for those abnormal conditions, something that's going to be easily managed to ensure that people understand at a quick glance whether or not we're doing the right things. Okay? So kind of a cool concept there. I wanted to re-hit this 7.3 clause again. And again, this is the one talking about awareness. People that are doing work for the organization, they need to understand their contribution to the effectiveness of the QMS and the implications of non-conforming product, right, or non-conforming conditions. So what happens when we do things well and what happens when things don't go well? And if they have, at all levels of the organization, if they have awareness of what those indices are and they can understand these visual cues, they're going to be more successful in understanding their current performance. Now I want to put kind of a sports twist on this, and for those that have heard this, I do apologize because I use this a lot for folks folks that I interface with. Talking about a baseball team, what matters at the end of the season to a baseball team? Ultimately, it's at the club level, did we win the hardware? Did we win the trophy? Did we win the championship? Did we get a ring? In order for us to do that, frankly, we have to win games. We got to make a berth into the playoffs, and that's where the wins and losses at the top level matter. Now, for a professional team, there's probably a few more indices, right? Did we sell enough tickets to afford the key players that we have? Did we sell enough concessions, et cetera, et cetera? All of those top-level, club-level management objectives or quality objectives, as the standard defines, are going to be indicators for the club level. Now, as an individual player, is it easy for me to understand how I contribute to wins and losses? If I'm a pitcher on a baseball team, am I playing every game? Obviously, the answer is probably not, especially in a starting rotation pitcher. You're playing maybe one every 4. So can I attribute every win or loss to my performance? No. And that's where having more relevant unit level or even a player level objective or KPI is probably important. So we know at the unit level, and what I mean by that is department or activity level, how we're performing. And in sports, there's all kinds of associated data with performance, right? If we're looking at the hitting side, we can see how many innings were played, how many at-bats, runs, hits, how many doubles, how many triples, home runs, base on balls, etc. There's all kinds of statistics associated with both the team level and individual players. So if I'm a coach for this organization or a supervisor within a manufacturing organization, I can see whether or not my team is performing to the levels. Now, if I'm a president, if I'm an executive for the organization and I see that I'm winning, I may not necessarily care about all of this because things are going well. But this is an opportunity for us to help drive that continual improvement and look at the data associated with our teams and find out, are we slipping? Looking at those trends to see, are we moving in the wrong direction? Are we starting to see a downward trend in the number of home runs that we hit? Or are we starting to get more base on ball or less base on balls, meaning we're taking swings at things we shouldn't be? So I can increase the amount of batting practice. Or if maybe pitching is our problem, we can look down here and see how many innings were pitched and the ERA associated with those pitchers. Now, being a Colorado Rockies fan for a number of years, I can tell you that we've led the league in hitting and fielding for most of those years, but our pitching is dismal. And as a result, we usually finish dead last in the division. So as an executive or as a team manager, I can look and see pretty easily where my weaknesses are and use that data to hopefully drive in the off season, picking up some talent associated with those different positions. Now, again, translating this back to companies, I think everyone's been able to hopefully make that connection pretty easily. But we use those process KPIs as a means to determine whether or not our production process, maybe our purchasing process, maybe our shipping process is performing to their potential. And then we can use this data to help drive the changes to maybe add headcount or change the work environment, change the infrastructure associated with those processes, and drive the needed improvement. If you've been on ESPN at some point in your life or any of those sports type sites, you've seen all of this sort of data available, right? It exists for every sports team out under the sun and even individual players associated with each of those sports. But for the companies that make us money every day, we don't necessarily have that level of data. And sure, it takes time to get there, but if we start with some relevant data, maybe a couple data points associated with individual processes, we can identify where our problematic areas are and drive into more specific measurements associated with that. Now, as we've talked before, culture matters. It can't be a punitive thing because just because one of these players is performing at a very poor rate, we can look at Scott here and see that his ERA is way, way high. That's how many earned runs per inning. So he's had 7 runs in 1 inning. Now, is that apples to apples compared to this guy who's pitched 13 innings and has an ERA of 1.5? Probably not. But we can see what maybe Patterson's doing well that Scott's not. Or vice versa, maybe we can hopefully compare all of these data points and understand what works best for us and drive some consistency within our processes using those educated guesses more so than just arbitrary or emotional data points. Okay? Hopefully we've been able to draw the connection there as to why we measure. Now, how we measure, some of the optional tools that we've seen as auditors throughout the course of time, and again, this is not a comprehensive snapshot. This is just some examples that we've seen that have worked in different organizations. First one here is kind of a neat dashboard that has a lot of data points on the cluster on the dashboard here. But you can see their revenues, their profitability, their growth, and they've got some key indicators associated with this. Another example using the similar approach is a couple bar charts that are available and line graph available on a one-pager that shows current performance of the company. Now, these are great examples as to what's going on, but keep in mind, the more complex you make these, the more time you have to spend with those individual employees explaining to them what this means. Because they have to have an awareness of the data and how they contribute to the data and what happens when the process doesn't go well, right? So if we make one of these charts that requires a statistician to interpret, we're probably going to lose in translation a lot of what the meaning is here. Another cool format that I saw and shamelessly stole, and I've shared it with a number of the companies that I've audited, is this spreadsheet format. So you can see down the left axis here, they've got identified all of the quality objectives tied to the organization in terms of safety, quality, delivery, revenue, profitability, and growth. There are different processes, so this is the management type activities, some of their materials objectives, and customer requirements. And I deleted a lot of this data, and this is all fictional data just for use in this presentation. But you can see some of the things they're monitoring for their materials process or their purchasing, incoming inspection, inventory activity. How many supplier reviews were done on time? Purchase price variance associated with suppliers, on-time delivery for suppliers, non-conforming or non-conformances for suppliers, incoming inspection yield, average inspection order aging, so how long it takes to get through the incoming inspection process, receiving inspection order aging, or excuse me, the receiving process. This is the QA function, and this is a inventory function of their process. Shipping, it's under that materials management group, so how many shipping errors were found at the customer. And then under the inventory piece, cycle count accuracy, how many kitting errors were found in terms of shortages, and then kitting cycle time, how long it takes them. So those are just some examples of the M&M activity, and they use this format to drive who's responsible for updating this, how often it's updated, and you can see they have a directional arrow associated because not all measurements need to be driven up, right? Number of safety accidents, we want that number to go down, and sometimes, especially for some of the hourly or production direct labor type folks, they may not have an understanding of that. So trying to simplify this and make it more digestible for them would be advantageous, especially because they have to have an awareness and the knowledge of this. But really what this format does is it has conditional formatting built in that says if it's not performing to the goal, then it shows as either a red or a yellow depending on the thresholds that it's hit. And it's pretty difficult to see on this, but there's notes associated with each one of these. This is done in Excel, and they've added notes into each one of these that's performing below goal to say what it was attributed to and what's being done. Now, if you think about this in terms of management on a weekly basis, you probably have some staff meeting or general reporting session where you're covering a lot of these topics. And rather than spending a fair amount of time going through each of these individual indices, you can use more of a visual managed by exception type approach, and we see that all is well in this category, this category. So let's talk about safety. We had one accident here. In this category, we had an issue in February. What was attributed to that? Again, this is set up on a monthly reporting, but it can be done at any interval that you want. Just kind of a cool format for that. Again, optional tool, something that's available. Another format that we've seen a lot, different variations of it, but they have visual management boards. And these are got a better screenshot to show you what those boards kind of look like, and it's kind of blurry, so I apologize. But they're broken down into different numbers, and those are associated with the dates of the month. And then it's up to the team that's responsible for updating that board. They're going to come through on a daily basis and meet for 5 minutes and talk about performance for yesterday, and they're going to fill this in together. And then all of this data gets rolled up into a plant board. There's a number of the big companies that are taking on this type of a visual management approach, and then that's translating down into supply base. So what you'll see is the top-level metrics or the top-level things associated with each of the teams, and then kind of the supporting data, the Pareto data, if you will, supporting why it's into that category. Again, totally an optional format, just another tool that we've seen. On the right-hand side, you'll see kind of a similar approach of here's the different machines, here's the time. Were we successful or were we not? Was the machine down, as evidenced by the red? Did we have issues with receiving? Did we have issues with something else? You can color the different cells with a different color associated with different performance problems. And the key is this is done by the operator, so it's real easy for them to understand current performance and how they contribute, right? If I have a defect, I know I have to go shade this cell in red, and it's pretty easy for me to understand why that's red and tell the story. And that's one of the cool things that I've seen with a lot of these visual management boards is anybody on the team has the ability to present. There's a lot of people that are presenting these on a rotation type basis where each person on the team has to present the data at least once a month or once a week, depending on the size of the team. Again, totally an option for you. It's just one of the other formats that we've seen. At the end of the day, what matters is the employees of the organization know the objectives, they know how they contribute to the objectives, and we know a path forward if we're not performing to those objectives, right? We've covered that in excruciating detail thus far. The last slide associated with this section, again, a few reminders. Employees need to know their company objectives. They need to have awareness. Great companies empower the employees to actively track their metrics and their KPIs. So they know how they're performing and they know why it's being marked down. It can't be so complex that they can't be kept up to date. I mean, we can create all kinds of really intricate scorecards, but ultimately those take time for somebody to update. And let's face it, when things get going rough, that's one of the first things to fall by the wayside. So it's got to be culturally, it's got to be something that's maintained, because this is the indicator as to whether or not we're doing well. I mean, can you imagine going to a sporting event, going to watch the Jazz play, or going to watch, your favorite team play? I say the Jazz because I'm a Salt Lake fan and I live in Salt Lake, and we played pretty well last night. But you go to the game and you see the scoreboard shut off. So now you don't know what the current score is. You don't know what the time remaining is. It would be pretty tough for you to stay engaged as a player and understand where you're at, right? Well, translate that over to business. If we don't know where we're currently at, how do we know what direction we need to go? So it's important that we have this data subset available in real time. And again, the relevance to the process and to the players. We need to make sure that we're monitoring things that those people can impact, right? On-time delivery or product quality for the company is probably a great metric for a top level. But if I'm talking to a purchasing agent, it's pretty tough for them to understand in a lot of cases how they contribute directly to the on-time delivery performance. They can certainly impact it, but there's a lot of other factors that are going to be definitely tied to the performance of it. And then last bullet here, these need to be used by management to make those educated decisions on strategic direction. And we've got some mandated requirements of management review and data analysis. We have to look at our monitoring and measurement data associated with the organization's health, and then we have a mandated format of when that needs to be done through the management review. So that's really the gist of what I have here. Hopefully it's provoked a few thoughts on what or why we would need KPIs, what we can track as KPIs and how we can hopefully report those both internally, and then why when your auditor shows up, they're asking for that KPI performance. Because, again, it's something we have to report, and it's something you're mandated to have. So we would hope that it's readily available. We would hope that it's readily available to us as we ask those questions. So hopefully this helps to understand or to explain a little bit better. Now, last thing here is a Q&A period. And while people are typing their questions into the chat feature, I'm going to go through a couple other slides that just introduce some of the resources and point you to those resources. We'll start answering the questions as they pop up. So the first one is our NSF website, and you can see the address is here, www.nsf.org, info ISO updates. There's an AS9100 2016 tab, and if you scroll down through this section, you're going to find links to the webinar series. It's got a bunch of our other tools listed here. There's a lot of useful information, good information underneath this. Now, I understand that a lot of our tools are developed for the 9100 document itself. I'm in the process right now of creating the 9120 resources, specifically the internal audit checklist and the gap analysis tool, and then we'll also deploy that for 9110. Looking at it from a Pareto standpoint, 9100 makes up probably 90 to 95% of the certificates that are out there, NSF included. So we're focusing on that first, and there's a lot of similarity between 9100, 9110, 9120. So you're 85% of the way there with using a 9100 certificate, or excuse me, a 9100 gap analysis tool. And then we'll develop this more specific stuff associated with 9110, 9120 as time permits. But all of that's available from that website. Again, there's a link, or the web address is there, and it covers the transition guide, gap tool, the internal audit tools, and some additional tools. If you have any requests, please let us know. We'd be happy to work with it, and I'll share the contact information here in just a moment. And then another link here to the IAQG website, where you can find some great information both in the Supply Chain Management Handbook, which is referenced over here on the left side, and then also under the deployment support materials, which can be found here or here. And frankly, if you click here, it'll get you to the same spot. But the deployment support materials has all of the FAQs and clarifications and IAQG developed tools associated with the transition plan. So all of those are available on the website. Feel free to go shamelessly steal whatever you want from our site, from the IAQG site, because frankly, it's all about making sure that the supply chain gets to where they need to be, because at the end of the day, that's what makes us all better. So with that said, I want to say thank you for joining us. Here's the contact information. I'm going to start going through some of the questions. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat feature, and we'll get through all of them as we go. But I'm going to leave the contact information up so you can copy that down and shoot us an email if you have any specifics. Before I get into the questions, Mike, do you have anything you want to add? Not to put you on the spot here.
The only thing I wanted to say, and I wanted to say it from very early on in this, anybody that is watching or listening or viewing this webinar, take it as maybe the best or most valuable one you've gotten so far. And when I say that, I mean the others were very important and very good, and they explained industry standing and what we need to do to get ready for the new transition. This does that along with giving extremely, extremely helpful business points and business ideas. Because and we talk about this with top management all the time, as a manager, you should want to know how your processes are performing and not something that's just a nod or a wink and says they're doing well. You want something definitive. And there was some extremely valuable information in here. Don did one heck of a job. And if you get a chance, read Peter Drucker. Grab something by Peter Drucker. He wrote numerous books on business and business management and organization. Fantastic stuff, and it can do nothing but help. So that's really all I had. And thanks everyone for attending.
Very good. Thanks for adding that, Mike. Let's go through some of the questions now. So the first one says, you may have stated this in the beginning, but will we receive a copy of the presentation? Yes, there's going to be a link sent out by Ryan within the next couple of days that will have a copy of or a link back to our website where this recorded presentation will be stored. We typically haven't shared the PowerPoint slides, but I'm sure we can upload a PDF. Ryan, do you have any problem with that?
Nope, we can do that too.
So if you're interested in getting a copy of the slides, we can have that, and I'm sure Ryan will detail that in the email that goes out. Will ISO 22716 be included in this eventually? Frankly, I hope not. We're already plagued by reference standards. It's a great document, don't get me wrong, but it's a little too prescriptive, a little too restrictive on the shall side of it. It's got some great information, so if you're interested in reviewing it, please do. But you'll notice that a lot of the ISO and AS documents have stripped out references to other standards. Done so intentionally because there's a lot of excessive information that's there that was seen as more of a mandated requirement versus just guidance information, regardless of what was put. So I think you're going to see more of a guidance direction towards 22716, but it's probably not going to be stated as a requirement or as a informational note type thing. Can you provide a few examples of KPIs related to contract review and purchasing? What do companies measure for these processes? And I think I can go back to that slide that showed the processes associated with materials or the requirements associated with materials. So these are them. This is for an organization, again, fictional data associated over here, but these are real live metrics associated with what this organization monitored for their materials, specifically the purchasing activity, and then for the contract requirements or the customer requirements process in this case, which was associated with their engineering functions of how quickly they created a job packet, number of production change orders that were created. So was my traveler correct when it was released, or did it need a revision? Or how many quotes did I send out? How many of those quotes did I win? How many customer complaints were received? How many corrective actions were received? And how many survey performance that was performed over time? So these are just some examples of data points for those types of activities. Nothing mandatory. It's all up to you and how you want to monitor the perception of your customers or the performance of your processes, but it's important for you to identify those vital few, those indicators, those indices associated with your performance so that you're tracking the pertinent health statistics for that process and using that data to drive the continual improvement of the process. Hopefully that answers that question. Next one says, we struggle with having objective metrics for our various business processes. Typically, I get more audit responses of empirical evidence rather than objective. I've always taken the position that if it's not being officially or not being objectively measured and proactively communicated, then it's not being done. Do you agree? Yeah, for the most part. I think there's some metrics that are worth measuring from a business process standpoint, and I think there's some that we measure because we've always done it that way. And then there's some that we just need to for whether it be management preference or industry requirements or whatever it might be. Some of those data points like safety. Now, if I'm in an industry that has traditionally a pretty healthy lost time accident record, meaning 0 accidents per year, is this a relevant metric? The answer to me is yeah, it's still relevant because at the end of the day, I got to make sure my employees feel safe at work and they want to keep coming. Now, can I drive continual improvement on a 0 goal and 0 performance over time? Probably not. So there may be some drill down data associated with maybe near misses or first aid type incidences, or maybe a 5S type metric that's going to help contribute to the overall achievement of the safety performance. But I think at the end of the day, it's got to be more of the empirical data with evidence associated with it that we can use drive the behavior. While there may be some subjective, I think relying on that more performance-based measurement is important. What is an effective method for measuring KPI within the engineering department as a whole and individually by department, software, electrical, hardware? Well, I think rather than getting into specific situations, I'll point back to this data point for this particular group. Did we release our job travelers, our packets, our instructions, our bill of materials, our documents on time? And were they right? Because at the end of the day, that's really the output of the function for the engineering team, was did we give production the tools that they needed, and was it correct when it was released? So you can come up with some variations of those types of metrics, but it's going to be somewhere in that space. Different levels of company, different sophistication levels within those companies may drive that metric to be more specific to their needs. But I think that gives us a good snapshot of where we could be or what we could be measuring. Any ideas for KPIs for quoting process, contract review, wins, loss, turnaround time? Yeah, I think we've kind of shown that through this slide again. There's plenty of opportunities for us to track stuff in the quoting space, right? If I have a real soft backlog and I know that I'm only winning 30% of what I quote, I know that I need to quote a heck of a lot more orders to fill the backlog. So these are pretty pertinent measures for me to understand as a management team. Do we have enough sales people that are quoting? Have we been aggressive enough in our quoting efforts, right? These are absolutely pertinent data points for us to help backlog. And maybe there's something that's more meaningful to you. Again, you got to find the vital few that's associated with your customer's needs. Does turnaround time matter for a quote? Depends on the industry. Sometimes it's got to be done pretty quickly. Sometimes quotes take a week to a month to complete, and that's perfectly normal within that industry space. So it's again, what's relevant to you as a company and what's relevant to your organization. Ms. Jane, I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you soon. And last question here right now. Again, feel free to put some more into the chat function if you have any. It says, we track safety loss time, but under the new D, they talk about product safety, and most of our customer products, they don't tell us much about their usage. So how can we address the safety requirement? So two facets to product safety. Product safety can be tied to the safety of the product in its end-use environment, ensuring that we're not causing further degradation of the product and that it's being maintained throughout our cycle. And then the other aspect is that we're keeping our employees safe during that. I mean, if we've got some hazardous chemicals that we're using, not on the product safety side, but if on the employee safety side, if we've got some hazardous chemicals that we're using in the manufacture of this, we want to prevent accidents, et cetera, from happening associated with it. For the product safety piece, I'm going to point you back to our webinar associated with product safety. It's a pretty good description of what was expected regarding product safety requirements for both the 9100 and the 9120, because they both have kind of a different twist on the interpretation of product safety. And product safety is not a new requirement for the 9110, so I kind of excluded it from there. So yeah, go check that webinar out. And again, the link to that can be found at our nsf.org website, that info, ISO updates. Specifically, if you go to the ISO 9000 or 91 or AS9100 2016 under the webinar series, you'll be able to find it there. So I'll give everybody probably another 30 seconds to ask questions. And if there are no more questions, again, I want to say thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining us today, and hopefully we can keep you entertained with some future webinars. Again, we're planning to do one a month for the next foreseeable future, just to ensure that everybody's kept updated on the changing requirements and the expectations of the industry, and hopefully adding a little value with the certification service that we're bringing. Traditionally, we only have that big stick of the nonconformity that we use to help educate people on changing requirements. And the focus here is to make sure that we're giving you those changes and maybe some interpretive information from industry in advance so that we're not using the nonconformity as much as we need to or we have in the past. Our goal is certainly to ensure conformity of your system, not to write nonconformity, so the more we can do that proactively, the better off we're all going to be. So no more new questions. Again, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Have a great day.